everyone, and welcome to the All About Film for PoPho Luminar, or Luminare, depends on which side of the box you look at, 100. This is a Kodak Aerocolor IV, which is emulsion 2460 respool. So we're just going to call this Luminare 100 throughout the course of this video. It is, like I said, a respooling of the 125 ISO Kodak Aerocolor IV. And this video is going to look at how to use this, some of the film characteristics, limited technical details, and also a lot of sample images. Luminare 100 is a medium speed film available only in 35mm. This is one of multiple Aerocolor IV respools, so everything discussed in this video applies to the other respools as well. This film stock can be developed in C41 or E6 chemistry, and there will be samples of the latter in this video. Filtration is recommended with E6 development, but quite honestly, I did not use any filters on the slide shots for this video and just did my corrections in post. Color corrections, if I wanted them, were very easy to do with just a few sliders. If you are going to develop this in a lab from an E6 slide, you will need to do some in-camera or in print development filtration. But by and large, I really did not adjust the colors on the slide samples that much, or really, frankly, the C41 samples, and instead chose to embrace the color cast that's delivered by the digitization methods with this film. Kodak's technical datasheet recommends a 125 ISO rating for this film stock when developed for maximum contrast, and for slide film as a sidebar, I do recommend developing this at 125. The exposure latitude is very, very narrow when this is a slide film. Every respool that I'm aware of, and I am not an encyclopedic, warehouse of all of the respool data points for this film, but all the ones I'm aware of rate this at 100. 100 and 125 ISO are really so close that for color negative development, it's not going to matter. However, for slide film, it does, and I found that at 100 ISO, all my slides were a bit blown out, so definitely shooting this as slide film, rated 125, maybe even 160, bit of conjecture on my part there, because I suspect that slightly underexposing the slide film, if you develop this for slide film, will give you richer colors. My next tip is that the color profile on the stock will be skewed, and that's not because of anything particular to the stock. It's because, well, I should say it is. It's not because of the emulsion. The stock's color base is a bluish clear color, which is why it can work out to be a slide film. And what that does is when a slide scanner, when a flatbed or any kind of film scanner, digitizes it, the film scanner anticipates that there will be a red base to the color negative film. Because this doesn't have a red base, what's going to happen is that the film is going to skew red. So this look can either be embraced, as I chose to do the vast majority of the time, or you can correct it in post. So the Kodak datasheet also suggests using an HZ4 or HZ5 filter for in-camera color correcting for the blue spectrum. My last tip, try this as a slide film, either filtered or not. So had I known when I started this video a year ago how well this film would perform as a slide film, I'd definitely have shot a bunch more, maybe in fact all of it, for slide development. I would recommend that this film be used for slide development if you develop and digitize your film at home, as it will be easier to digitize it and the results will likely be better. An interesting point about this stock when used for E6 development, it loses a boatload of dynamic range and exposure tolerance. What that means is it becomes a lot harder to obtain a good exposure from this film as a slide stock than when you develop it for C41 color negative development. This film performs a lot like older slide films in that regard when it comes to exposure latitude and tolerance, and there will be a learning curve to using this film as a slide stock. Grain is generally highly pleasing and hard to spot. If Kodak provides a print grain index for this film, as they do with their C41 stocks, I could not find it. Eyeballing the film, I would say it probably ranks in the vicinity of Portra 160 for print grain index, meaning very fine grain. That, by the way, is how Kodak describes this film in their data sheet. Tonality and tonal range are both fairly good, with exceptional shadow retention and very good highlight preservation when developed for color negative purposes. Aerocolor IV, as a color negative stock, handles extreme contrast scenes well. Acutance is fairly decisive with a nice and crisp transition between areas of shadow and darkness. Contrast is good as a color negative film, a bit stark as a slide film. And this is a key element, by the way, contrast being an element of film performance that amplifies color performance far more than a character that develops deep shadows. And so what I mean by that is that with this film, the contrast adds to the way the colors look, and it's not necessarily a contrast that's going to give you dark, dark shadows. And for a film that's intended for things like aerial surveillance and scientific study, you don't want dark, dark shadows. So that's a good thing. Sharpness is, like grain, very good, and this stands to reason for a film designed for uses such as forest studies that would require exceptional sharpness for the purposes of tree counting. Digital conversion is tricky if you want to correct for the colors based on the film's base color, but I say don't do that and enjoy the warmth. For those of you like me who digitize with a digital camera, digitizing the color negative development of this film is very, very hard, and I don't feel like I nailed it at all, ever. And I want to say I digitized about 12 rolls of this in SantaColor with my camera, and I could not dial it in well. As a slide film, it's much more straightforward to do that, and your results will be improved. For an additional note, this film was designed for scientific use with aerial photography. That it is used for general photography is off-label at best. So this film will perform in a different manner than other Kodak films, and that does kind of make it a unique offering in the market. This is a color spectrum performance relatively in line with Kodak C41 film stocks. As an asterisk, I believe that the spectral sensitivity is based on how the emulsion performs. To the Kodak film emulsion engineers who subscribe to my channel, if I'm wrong about this next statement, please let me know. I understand that spectral sensitivity is evaluated in a vacuum without the influence of film base color factored in, which would make sense as the emulsion is between the base and the real world. However, base color does have an effect on prints and digital scans, so in practice, the positive images from this film, uncorrected digitally, will skew red because of the assumptions that digital scanners make about film base color. To me, it's a unique look and one that I quite like. Looking at images with a corrected color balance, Aerocolor IV looks a lot like a fine-grain Ultramax in the red tones and Kodak Gold in the cool tones. It's a generally pleasing color profile, and no, I do not know how E6 development will affect images versus this graph, except that you will have way more blue scale amplification in your E6 images. Kodak, true to form, provides a fairly poor level of reciprocity failure data. The datasheet notes that from 1/10,000th to 1/10th of a second, no filter correction is needed. This seems to imply that some level of color shift can be expected on longer exposures. Did I test that? Yes. Did the highlights skew magenta? It appears so, but that's hard to fully discern against the film's red cast. Being an aerial photography film, this would likely not have been one that was engineered with long exposures as a target performance metric, so it would make sense that you don't need or can't use this without filter correction longer than 1/10 of a second. So if you do plan to do long exposures with this stock, plan to either correct the colors in post or use a roll to test the performance of various exposure lengths in different lighting and or with different filters. Ensure that if you do that to take a test roll to see how this performs, make sure you take at least one faster exposure within the 10,000th to 10th of a second range as a control to test color shifts and exposure compensation needs against when you get your final images back. Kodak Aerocolor IV is a curious stock, and it's gained some popularity in the analog community for the way it renders images and colors. I would argue, and noting that this film is one that I like a lot, that this one is worth trying by any color film photographer. I would also say that shooting this as a slide film is an even better use of this stock. Films that can be used as both negative and slide films are highly useful offerings, and the different development approaches and profiles in the final images can create far different image characteristics from the same film. PoPho Luminar 100 is a good bridge between the two primary color film types. ECN2, let's all agree, lacks the wide consumer adoption to be considered a common film type. What separates the Aerocolor IV respools is, simply, packaging and delivery. I liked the SantaColor packaging and cassette reuse a lot. I like the packaging design on PoPho way more. To that end, if whoever designed the PoPho packaging is listening, it is slick and it looks fantastic.